Greetings everybody, this is Marcus Toole and I am in my orchard. It is April 29th and this is a tour of the orchard. The tree you are looking at is one that I'm calling Whimsy. It is a Chickasaw Asian plum hybrid. It is a seedling of Robusto that I germinated a few years ago, and I have planted it. I have given suckers away from it, so it is a variety now because other people have it. And so for the sake of tracking it and its fruiting qualities, I've given it the name Whimsy. It is fruits similar to Robusto. It's kind of large red plums. They get soft when they're ripe. It's a little bit later ripening, earlier blooming. The tree has a good crop on it. So far this year, they are not as big as the Robusto plums, but I think it's just because they tend to ripen later. This tree is very popular with my customers who like tart plums. This little tree over here is supposed to be a Shiro. A friend gave me scion, and it is grafted it last year into a N.C. McKibben sucker that sprung up in this location from an N.C. McKibben tree that has Robusto grafted into it. Shiro is really one of those California varieties. It may not be disease resistant enough for the climate here and the pressure here, but others have gotten away with it in places like Louisiana, so I'm going to try it. It's a yellow plum, and we'll see how it does. This big tree, most of it is Robusto. It was high grafted. The original tree was N.C. McKibben, and I grafted half of it as a Robusto, and the other half I left as N.C. McKibben, North Carolina McKibben, which is a Chickasaw type. The McKibben never really produced much fruit, and the fruit that it did produce, I didn't like the flavor of it very much. So I have grafted most of it over into other things. Like this branch here is more Robusto. This branch here, I think, is Guthrie. And then more recent grafts up here, one of it's Auburn University Cherry, and that's the graft there. And then the graft up here is Ruby Sweet. But most of the tree is Robusto, and it's producing a big bumper crop this year. The only part of the tree that doesn't have a lot of fruit in it is the very top part. Way up there doesn't have a whole lot in it, but that's because it bloomed later, and there was a lot of rain and not much pollination going on when that part of the tree bloomed out. These three suckers here, well, actually they're grafts. So I'll show you the graft down here. I did that this spring. So the suckers were N.C. McKibben, and what's grafted into it are Black Ruby, which is a black plum, kind of late ripening, and hopefully it'll take our climate. This is one released by the USDA in Byron, Georgia. I've got a couple of wild plums here. This one is a strain that's kind of late blooming, and this one here is kind of early blooming. You know, they're kind of close together, but they're just wild plums there for pollination. This little tree here is a segundo that is grafted into a Marianna rootstock. And the reason why I use Marianna is because of its proximity to the Whimsy. And I don't want, Marianna has a very distinct leaf from Whimsy and I don't want it to be close to a tree where I would have trouble telling the suckers apart. All right, well, let's move to another part of the orchard. Over here, kind of close to the Robusto, is my LeConte pear. LeConte is the oldest of the hybrid sand pear, European pear hybrids that have high quality fruit that's similar to what a soft pear from France like Bartlett. And so this pear tree has done pretty well. It got hit by fire blight really hard last year. I had to cut it back real hard. It's not producing a lot of fruit this year because of how badly I pruned it, but there is some. And this year it's had very little fire blight, so it seems to be recovering. All the pear trees, all the later blooming pear trees got hit pretty hard. This pear tree here is Tennessee. Similar story, not quite as bad of a fire blight infection. Didn't have to cut it back as severely, and consequently there's a little bit more fruit in it than there is in the LeConte, but not a whole lot. We got, well, that's a huckleberry. We got some fruit forming on the Fuyu persimmon, and looks like it's actually, this is a gyro persimmon, very similar to Fuyu, similar sort of fruit quality. This little tree here is a Savannah pear. It hasn't bloomed yet. I did get my first Savannah pear last year from a multi-graft tree, and I have to say that's one of the highest quality pears for our climate, flavor-wise. It's a rare variety. Only a couple of people have it. It's supposedly it originated from one of the historic homes in Savannah. Okay, as we move this way, we got a ruby sweet plum that's grafted into a Ridgeland sucker. Now the original Ridgeland tree is right here, and this is an improved Chickasaw type. It's going to make a fairly decent crop this year. Pretty happy with it, with what it's going to do for no bigger tree than it is at this stage of its development. And then once again, the reason why I used it as the root stock is because I wanted to make sure that all the suckers coming up in this area are all of the Ridgeland, so that I don't get confused as I sell suckers. This little plum over here is a Byron Gold. It's another one of the hybrids that's been released by the Byron research place, USDA research place in Byron, Georgia. And it's also grafted onto Ridgeland, and it's grafted on for the same purpose, so that all the plum trees in this area are suckering the same kind of tree. All right, well, let's keep moseying along. This tree here is a early blooming wild Chickasaw plum. It's a really good pollinizer of other varieties. It does a really good job with the Ridgeland. It does a really good job with other early blooming varieties. Did a really good job on this Robusto. It did do had enough overlap with it to do a good job with both of the Robusto trees, actually, and probably Whimsy and probably Flea Market. And as you can see, this Robusto tree is just really covered in plums. I was watching another YouTube channel the other day, one out of Australia, and the guy was arguing or discussing the issue of whether to thin plums or not. And he's kind of against the practice in home orchards. And my position on it, this tree I did thin, and my position on it is that it isn't as important to thin them as much as you would if you were selling them commercially, and really had to have huge plums for a supermarket table. But I tell you what, I thinned these plums, and if I were thinning them for a commercial setting, I would have thinned them more than I did. But for the home setting, you don't need to thin them quite so much, but you do need to thin them sometimes. Just if you get a really big bumper crop, the plums end up, not only do they end up being smaller, but they end up not being very sweet. The other issue is that if you let the plum tree overcrop too bad, the limbs will tend to break in storms. And also the other issue is that often the trees won't bloom very well the next year, and you'll end up with alternating years between feast and famine. Feast one year, famine the next. This huge tree here is the Marianna plum, and it is huge. It is the tree. The canopy is 20 to 35 feet from tip to tip, from one side to the other. And you know, I posted some photos from it yesterday, and someone commented about the shade when I was showing the plums on the tree. And in the photo, it's like, well, the thing is, the tree is so big, when you're taking pictures of the plums, you're under the tree, and the shade is not other trees shading the Marianna. It's the shade that the Marianna tree itself is producing. And in fact, the Marianna tree is so big, so much bigger than you plan for when you plant a plum tree, that there are pear trees that are too close to it. And you know, and I planted them at the recommended distances. It's just that the Marianna tree has gotten huge. And in fact, this year, after the harvest, I'm probably going to reduce the size of this tree by about 1/3, just because of the impact it's having on nearby trees. We have another Byron Gold here that I'm planning to keep. It's right next to Toole's Heirloom, and the rootstock I use for Byron Gold is Toole's Heirloom. For the same purpose as I said before, it's so that the suckers that come up in this area are, you know, I know what they are. Now there is this Marianna tree right next door, but I'll have no trouble telling the difference between a Toole's Heirloom sucker and a Marianna sucker. All right, let's continue on the other part of the orchard. We continue this way. You see the little trees coming up? These are the Toole's Heirloom suckers that are coming up, which I'll either sell or I will graft other trees on them next year. This little tree here started out as a strain that I'm calling Iron Gate. I got this plum, which I think is a hybrid, from someone in the Iron Gate subdivision here in Statesboro, and I grafted it into a wild plum. The wild plum has since produced this water sprout, and I actually kept it because Iron Gate was such a slow grower. I wasn't convinced that it was ever going to do anything, and I needed a later blooming pollinizer for the Toole's Heirloom that's just right next door. And this tree was breaking dormancy a little later, so I was hoping, I had high hopes that it would be a later pollinizer for other trees, and it indeed has turned out to be. So I'm quite pleased with that. Now, if this little Iron Gate plum turns out to be good enough, I may have to make some decisions, and I'm not sure how I'm going to improve the situation for that little tree and still keep the wild tree. This citrus here is a pink grapefruit called Pink Frost. This one hasn't grown much. I've moved it to this location because it wasn't very happy in its original location. This is Arctic Frost. This is kind of a tangerine, satsuma kind of thing. This is some blueberries. This pear tree here is a golden boy. Boy, this tree got yacked really bad by fire blight last year. I did a lot of work on it, and it looks a lot better this year. One of the things that's helping is I put zinc, flowable zinc in with the copper sulfide solution that I use to protect the trees from fire blight, and it seems to have worked. This is a Baldwin pear. This tree was not harmed by fire blight. Recent years has had a real fit with black leaf spot, but it seems that this year with the using the zinc that hasn't been nearly as bad. Now I cut this tree, I cut it back by about a third this spring, and I'm gonna cut it back by about another third this fall. I'm just not gonna let my pear trees get so big anymore, just for the sake of managing them for fire blight. This is kind of my row of citrus. Most of the citrus isn't going to be very productive this year. The exception is I have some good fruit forming on my pink frost grapefruit trees. Has some fairly good fruit. The herbs that are growing in the backyard lawn, this is actually black-eyed Susans. They're flowers. I just let them come up, and I kind of let them come up in patches, and it just brings some color to the orchard, and also attracts bees. This is a Robusto plum that I grafted last year. There's a wild plum next to it. That's the same as that one that has the Iron Gate sign. It's a late bloomer. And then we got this Sunny's yellow. Yes, the native plum is too close to the other two, but that's okay. If it gets shaded, it won't make much difference. I'm not so much after fruit as I am after the flowers and the pollen that the flowers will make. So it'll be just fine. Over here I have another Ridgeland plum, which I'm going to let grow out, and for those plums. The Ridgeland's got such high fruit quality in itself. A wild plum seedling I'm letting grow out. This one here is Flea Market. It's another early producer, and it's got a big crop. This is one I had to thin quite a bit. These are really big plums, like Robusto, about the same size of plums as Robusto, and I thinned this tree out pretty good, because had I not done so, it would be laying on the ground at this point. Sunny's yellow. Sunny's yellow has the biggest crop I've ever gotten on it. And in fact, I was wondering how productive this tree is going to be, and now it's turning out that it's very productive. The secret, well, that's a complicated pollination story, and that deserves a video all by itself. These young plums here, most of them are Segundo. On NC McKibben, and one of them, the one that's in this little fence here, is on Tools Heirloom, and that's because this one over here, which is also a Segundo plum, is on Tools Heirloom. And I wanted to be sure that any suckers that come in here that are not red, like this tree here, that they're all Tools Heirloom. But I plan to sell most of the little trees. Whether or not I keep that Segundo that's inside the fence depends a lot on whether I get a very specific Chickasaw cultivar that someone might send me this fall. So it will depend on that. This tree here was an Odom Chickasaw plum. I grafted it over to Ruby Sweet, which is a cultivar bred in Byron, Georgia. The rootstock of this is also Tools Heirloom, so all the suckers coming up in this area here should be Tools Heirloom. All right, we got a mixture of grafted plums in here. The ones that are in this fence are ruby sweet. They're grafted onto, actually one's grafted onto a whimsy and the other's grafted onto the same rootstock this tree over here is grafted on, the flea market. And that tree is grafted onto another seedling of Robusto. And that seedling seems to have a dwarfing effect on the trees. This Chickasaw plum tree here is one we're calling Miss Bessie. I got it from Mississippi. It's very late blooming and seems to be a good pollinizer of the Sunny's yellow, or the portions of the Sunny's yellow that it blooms with. Sunny's yellow blooms for a long time, and a lot of the flowers open before this opens any flowers. But the ones that bloom together, it seems to pollinize them as well. And something pollinizes it, although it wasn't as good a pollination this year as I was hoping. It's okay, but this tree is not going to make a huge crop. Now that might be because of pollination. It also might be because this tree gets a fair amount of afternoon shade. So that could be an issue as well. All right, so I had a dead tree to fall in the yard, and I still got to get that cleaned up. And but this is the orchard tour. I didn't talk about fig trees, but that's okay. I'll do that on another tour. It's Market's Tool. This is the orchard here in downtown Statesboro, April 28th, 2024. Thank you.